Now this is how a typical your test class would look where you are writing your test cases. Now if you when you look at this class, there is a extensive usage of tags. So in this test class where I am writing test cases, annotations are extensively used. Now when we go down, here are the methods like add user, test add user, test add user fail. These are all methods that I am using to test certain unit of software. Whereas there are some other methods also. For example, here I have used a annotation called before all or before each, after all, and I have written methods for that. Now why do we need this? See, when you are doing the testing, there might be certain cases because in one class you are writing multiple unit test cases, and there might be something which is very common for all the classes to all these methods to execute. Things like probably loading a driver for database. Now that you can put it in this method which is annotated as before all. So before all is the method which will be when this test you decide to execute, this will be the first method that gets executed, whichever method you have given with before all as annotation. Before each, similarly, this annotation, whatever method is there, this will get executed before execution of each of the test case. So anything specific to each of these test cases that you want to do, like probably in some cases it might be opening some socket or something, maybe you can do that inside this method. After each is a method which will get executed after execution of every test case. So in this method you put cleanup code for whatever you did in before each, and after all is kind of cleanup for overall cleanup. That will happen only once. So out of these four methods, before all gets called only once, doesn't matter how many test cases you have. After all, whatever is there, that also gets called only once. Whereas the methods that are annotated with before each and after each, they get called before and after execution of every test case. Now there is another test case called at test. Now at test actually is the annotation which tells that the given method below is a method for testing purpose. Now if you write a method here without this at test case, that will be most likely some kind of a helper function that you are using. So that won't be executed as part of test case itself. So in test add user, what I am doing is I am just creating an instance of user manager, because that is how I know that in order to, if I want to add a user to the system, I need an instance of the test user manager. So I created it. On that user manager, I am calling add user function, and I am passing all the required parameters to it. It's the first name, middle name, last name, login ID and password and all that. And then once I call the method, and then whatever result I am getting, in this case, the add user method returns me an object for whichever user was created. And this user, I know for sure that when I'm creating, the ID will be 110. So I'm just asserting, I'm saying assert equals 110 to user get ID. So from this, I do a get user ID on the object that I got back from the user manager, and I know the value should be set for 110. So I am saying assert equals. So this assertions.assert equals will check whether whatever the value in get user ID for the returned object is equal to 110. So this is how a test would function. Similarly, I have test add user fail. Now test add user fail, what I am doing is, it is more or less the same, but what I do is I am passing the login ID and password I am passing as empty strings here, and in the add user method I am actually checking if login ID or password, any of these are not passed, then I would throw an exception saying it's an illegal argument exception, and I am just checking for that illegal argument exception here. If that is thrown, then I'll say true or else false, which means that in this test case I am expecting the test case to throw an exception here. That's why I have written the code like in this way. So this is an example of exception handling also. Now remember we spoke about arrange, act and assert. So the first these lines where we are creating the instance and filling the values. This makes the arrange part. The actual method calling, that is where the act part is, and then the assertion is the actual assertion. So similarly, I have test methods for other operations as well. For delete there is something, for update user there is something. One of the things that you have to notice is what I am doing is I know what data I have to pass in order to create the user object. So I'm passing all the data, and depending on the kind of operation that I am doing, I am very well aware of what response I should be getting back. This is what the white box testing concept is. So I am checking only for that data. Yeah, mostly we have used the assertions of assert equals. Assert equals is and assert null and assert not null. So let me tell a little bit about assertions. Now assertions are used for asserting the or verifying the data that is obtained. Now assert not null, when we use, what it does is, and we are passing an object to it, it checks that that is not null. So this particular check will fail if the user object that I have obtained here is null, and if that is the case, then it means my test case for this particular test case fails. Similarly, there is an assert called assert null, which will pass if the given object is null. Assert equals is another assertion, which what it does is it takes two objects, it checks if they are equal. If they are equal, then it passes. Assert true is more a check on Boolean value, or it might take either an expression or a Boolean value. Assert true, if the value is true, then it will pass, otherwise it will fail. So that way, yes. So that pretty much kind of explains basic assertions and basic annotations that we use for the executing JUnit test cases. So let us run this test case here, which is add user. It runs, and then here we see that the status is passed, which means this test case passed. We created, and what we got back is matching there.